Okay, here's an article that shows hidden geometric patterns discovered at Turkey's Gobekli Tepe site. Now, Gobekli Tepe is a site that's reaching right at the end of the Younger Dryas age and a little sooner than then. And this revelation that they have, that they've come out with, is something that I've been waiting for, and it kind of goes with the sacred geometry little series kind of things, and there's going to be pieces of it like I always do. I couldn't put it in a, you don't want a 5 or 6 series part on it, so it's better if I kind of go a little 101 on it, if you will, and also just show you variations, and you'll get the idea, I'm sure of it. And it's quite astounding, and it goes off measurements that are sacred to the human body and everything on the planet in some form, shape, or another. But that's for another video series. This is something that's going to kind of shatter that, because they found something that I didn't find. But in my series of sacred geometry, I was going to make 1 or 2 or 3, 4 that were going to be like applied sacred geometry, and here it is. And I did one before, but then I was, even in that video, I was like, I'm not going to do this justice if I do 3 of these. And I can't even explain it correctly. I don't think I have. If you had no idea what I was talking about, you probably still have very little of an idea what I'm talking about, and it looks like somebody's playing with string and spirograph. So, and that one may not even be available anymore. I may have turned it off because of some of the things I said in it, but anyhow, regardless of that, what we're looking at is concept of sacred geometry and what that has to do with things. And I'm telling you that it's the way that the ancients melded what's going on with the earth with what's going on in heaven, so they could be more heavenly like, and this drive for a concepts that went along with it ended up making our modern human and literally driving us into the ages that we've been talking about in all these other videos. And so it's a culmination, but just a little picture, and then we're going to go back in through a lot of different aspects of things that I didn't really touch upon, and again have a whole lot of in between little things that pop up and new information and stuff. In fact, it'd have been better if this popped up in about 3 weeks, but since it just popped up here on the 29th of April, I thought I'd go ahead and go into it. One thing, you look at this and you can tell it probably doesn't have sacred geometry in any way, shape, or form. But then you just look at things somewhat and you say, well, this is not even round, it's kind of an oval shape. If y'all are looking at it, let me zoom in on it so we're pretty much there. There. And so what you see is different pillars going around, and then 2 ones that are in the center of it. And some of them are like this, some are not necessarily. But they're going to talk about something in a minute, and there's 2 versions of this, and I hope it doesn't go into 2 series. I hope I can cram it all in one beautifully, but and just the thoughts that I have going on it. But just one thing to notice is look at the walls that are behind this and how well done they're done and stacked up like bricks. And even though they're all different shapes, they're trying to be the same size and uniform, and that's pretty much the way that it is around. But right here you can see some mess up, and then it gets about right. The top of this looks pretty smooth, but here you can see all this little griddle and things in there, and this is before they finished it off and took out the last of some rocks, or set this last part right up here and made that little sectioned off. And what is this for, you know, and things like that. Well, starting before what it's for, you have to say, what were their plans even in the first place? Because if you look at the intricateness of this is not necessarily on bedrock, and it's totally flat and level, and then they have taken and made a flooring in here. But better yet, right around this whole rim, they've got this other level that goes up higher. It's like a staircase thing that comes up from here and goes up and gets higher. And let's go back a little bit so you can see it. And this area, like right in here, and you would come up from here. And looking at this, it was a little confusing when I first saw them digging it out, and the way that the deals look like they're going around here, I always thought of dominoes, because that's the way you kind of set them up, and they better be careful about bracing. And they only had like some pieces of wood up in places, like you can see right here. And I thought, oh yeah, it's just going to go ting, 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 and go around the place, and then this one's going to fall over, and that vibration makes this one fall forward, and it all smashes it up. It's really going to be a pisser. But so this area, even though it doesn't look like it, has sacred geometry built into it, but that's not what they're going to talk about. This is what I can show you, and I'm going to call it sloppy sacred geometry. And while you could turn around and get the arc of the curve of where these meet each other and go all the way around with it, you can see that they did this blocked off line that's here, and in front of this there's this little ledge, and there's this ledge that runs around and so on. But if we were to just look at this, it's like, okay, it's a flat sheet of paper sitting at that angle, and we were to run a line across here through where those are. And by the way, this is north-south, and this is east-west, right here. And so if we were to run a line across here, how could we get east-west square? Well, there's ways around doing that, but one way that's shown here that they've done this and that they've utilized, it's something that I was going to show you that supposedly goes with Pythagorean theorems and Greek stuff, but I was going to show you it goes back much further. Habam, here it is. It may be here. For along that circle, what you do is you pick a point of thirds, and you take that point, and then you take somebody with that measurement and do a circle on the ground before this ever exists, and it's right there in the circle, and you can see it. And then the same distance you do one here, and you make the circle. And it's a little off in this, because it looks like if you did it right, it'd be right in front of this pillar, and yet it would still be this back wall, not this front, and cut off where this flat is, so that arch isn't quite right coming in there. It's not smooth, but this level here would be the circumference of the circle and the circumference of the circle, if you get what I'm saying, the two circles. And where they meet, they cross over each other, and that forms that vesica Pisces. And it's something like, hope I can get the shape in there, but it gives a shape. Oh man, I'm not going to be able to do it, but not going to be able to do it. See if I can do it here. Something like that. Two crossing over. It's the sacred feminine. And so that would put that lining up here, and literally from the bottom line to the top line of the sacred feminine, you get your north-south. It's there. And if you want parallel to this first initial line, one way to do it is the top of this circle, a line across the top of that circle, and you know that's parallel, and that's what this is built of. And how do you get that arch? Well, now we're starting to get in mathematics, and I'll really get into that more a little bit, and how you would get that extra line out there. For it's shown in geometric shapes that aren't even really figured out here, and this one would be off of a 8-sided dice, I believe. One thing else to note here is that if we had a pillar right here where it looks like one's missing, and we had two pillars right here, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pillars. 2 in the middle and making the sacred feminine. And people have said a lot about this enclosure here, but this is not even the famous one with the handbag deal and everything. Now this is not. No. And this looks a little different now, and they put all these poles holding people and things up because they thought, well, with it like this, just a simple earthquake and it could start toppling down, especially these ones that are set out there by, alone like this and so on. I think these were the ones that were exposed slightly, and the tips of like this one, and maybe over here, and maybe the tip of that one was what was exposed as part of the exposure, and they dug these out. And they've only done a few of them. But in doing so, it shows a level of intricacy with the sacred geometry. Then you have to look at the fact that they made these perfect slabs that are a certain width all throughout here to do things with, and they're not uniform, but they're still made to an exacting ideal, and that's somewhat incredible in its own self. But the way that they set this pillar up and they put it in a socket with an extra little build around it to give it a little strength, I mean, that's just, it's a pedestal piece where you stick it in the bottom. I remember having models whenever I was a kid, and this was the way that you do it. They'd have the little flange on the bottom, and you plug it into a little deal, and it'd stand there, right? And they look at this, and they say, oh, well, it looks like they had wood around certain parts of it, probably, and da-da-da, and everything, and maybe even a giant pole here right in the very center of it that was going up and do a tent idea, and you've seen some recreations of that, and people say, well, no, maybe they left it open, they're astrology kind of thing. And it looks like the answer might be yes. They may have had some places that were closed off, but some places that were open, like the whole vent right here. So they can really concentrate on that area of the sky. But you think, well, then they're leaving out part of the sky and not paying attention. Who's to say that they do that in different areas? Another thing about this is the one that's got the jaguar in it. And what's so intricate and so neat and so out of place is that that's a bas relief. So they cut away the stone. The stone was thicker than what it is up here. See how that's thicker than that? It was thicker than that all the way down, and then chiseling that away, they left it blob or a square. You'd think it'd be a nice way to do it, and then started chipping out and made this design. And there's ones all over the place, although this square doesn't have so many of them. And there's been things said about that, and there's only a couple of them that have the little hand things and this, that, and the other, and what this one has versus that one has. And see, it's not the same. And your first original idea might have been that this was the same, and so they were looking at ages of man, like it went through the zodiac ages, and it's like, no, it doesn't look like that. Certain ones might be for certain ages, and it looks like they might be built in clusters, and the ages are similar to each other, but I still believe with all the other sections of the pie they've yet to open up, we're probably going to see a difference in time, whether it goes back even farther than this, which would be exciting. This is exciting in itself, but this jaguar lion type of creature goes back through the Sumerians and stuff in a lot of ways, and people have thought this might have something to do with sacred birthing chambers or something, like maybe women that were here, that were pregnant, would go and have their babies here, and this sacred lion here is actually a protector. This whole concept of Pazuzu, and then they said, oh, everything's pagan and black magic crap, and it's like, no, but they thought that there was a demon that could steal the baby's thing and make crib death and all kinds of things, and so they put this scary creature in there, and he's so scary, he scares off the bad guy and nothing ever happens. Kind of a Halloween concept, which does fit into Gobekli Tepe, because that one that does have the handbags and stuff is declamating a time that really seems to go with this Halloween and so on. And I'll get back to that here in a minute, and the meteor storm that goes along with that. For this is just a meteor storm in itself with knowledge. So let's just zoom in so y'all can read it too. Yeah, looks good. Israeli archaeologists have discovered hidden geometric patterns in the layout of Gobekli Tepe, an archaeologist site in Turkey's southwestern Sanliurfa province that is home to the world's oldest found temple so far. And I'm about to show you some video coming up of some other places just like this that aren't quite as grandiose as what they believe this is on the ground, but they haven't dug them out really yet, and so it doesn't look as big, but yet there's a couple of them that already are showing an older date than this show. And that T-pillar idea that we can see after this point getting carried on, and places like Catalhoyuk and stone design, which gets carried all the way back down into around the Levant area, and it looks like ended up in Egypt or so on. People that are closely related, but then there's so much time between these two that that's why they don't want to go with any of this idea, because until this was found, they were like, couldn't have been nobody before this that ever built any stone. Everybody's said anything else. Well, okay, now this, if there was somebody building the pyramids, listen to this idea. The time they say they built the pyramids, we are closer in time to that guy that was building the pyramids than the guy in the pyramids to the time of Gobekli Tepe. So it's a radical another step. For a long time, we've been able to say something that's mind-blowing. I used to say it to people in college, even in stuff. Cleopatra was closer to our time than the time of the pyramids, so that's how old they already were. And it's like, wow, and you go, okay, check this out. Somebody building the pyramids till now? This is older than that. And it's just a whole nother thing. But they say it's the world's oldest temple. Just ask you a simple question. Does it look to you like this is the first thing out the gung-ho gate, and these people came out like some kind of marching band, ta-ta-ta-ta, out of nowhere? Popcorn again. We've talked about popcorn coming up out of nowhere, like Samaria came out of nowhere, and da-da-da, and then I did this little reveal. Well, here's all this crap that leads up to it, and so here it comes, and there it is. And there's still that popcorn moment that's incredible, that they blame on the gods and everything else, but there's more to that than meets the eye too. But I don't want to go down too many branches of too many different trees. I haven't gotten a paragraph into this yet. Archaeologists Gil Hackley and A.V. Gopher of Tel Aviv University have published a new report on Gobekli Tepe site, including on the UNESCO World Heritage List. The newest findings suggest that the Neolithic hunter-gatherers, supposedly, who built huge monoliths 11,500 years ago, had greater knowledge of geometry and much more complex social structure than previously thought, and that complex planning techniques were used that were previously considered impossible at the time. And you could probably dig around in a place and start finding arrowheads and stuff, and then all of a sudden you find a bracelet that's been drilled out of some special stone that's kind of shiny and polished up and made to make a thing, and you'd be like, now this is another level of what? Like, this looks like a bangle. This is chip, and all of a sudden out of nowhere, what the hell is this? Well, this is one of those what the hell is this moments, because again, it stretches back straight sacred geometry to double its time. Now they know that it went on in Stonehenge and all these clock circles that we have around the world that are calendar clock circles, if you will, but these are built like that and on that same somewhat technique. Oh, it's not the same. It's somewhat different, but it's definitely a predecessor to all of those that we found so far. Studies on the 3 oldest stone enclosures at the site reveal that these structures have a hidden geometric pattern included in an equilateral triangle that underlies the entire architectural plan. And if you think they're beating around the bush and missing the thing, they're kind of not telling you that it contains Pythagorean theorems, which we give credit to the Greeks, but in my sacred geometry, I'm going to go, well, here it is here. Now they're not putting it out and putting somebody's name on it, but here they're using it, and here they're using it, and Samaria, they're using it, and that's before the time of Pythagoras. And we're going to talk about what the ancients knew and how it seems like the Greeks did some kind of thing where they did a lot through there, where they conglomerated some knowledge and said, out of nowhere, popcorn. And it's like, no, he just put some stuff together. But it didn't all come from popcorn necessarily. They knew the world was round, and Eratosthenes, and these names that seem strangely to go with acts that they did or who they represented in some way, like Archimedes. Hackley and Gopher think that the structure consisting of 3 enclosures was designed as a single unit and most likely built at one time, contrary to previous assumptions. So people were thinking that they built one and then it quit lining up, so they built another one and so on. But when they started checking it out, archaeoastronomy kind of guys, they were like, well, no, it seems like it's about the same. Well, this one's definitely older, and this one's kicked off a little bit, and they've looked at a few of them and go, well, this one's out of line with what those two are doing, and so on. But then they're trying to figure it all out, and I'm not sure how much access they have to be able to get exact measurements, but these people did out of Israel, huh? This scenario would mean that the builders of Gobekli Tepe understood geometric principles thousands of years before the invention of the wheel and applied those principles to their construction plans. Gobekli Tepe is considered the birthplace of early civilizations now. Now, whenever I was going through school, they talked about how it was the Holy Land in Egypt, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, Sumeria is that's the birthplace of civilization. Like books were written with that name and stuff, and now you're going, well, no, it went back to like 6500 BC at least, but it's petering out in these places, and they go, oh yeah, well check this out, I'm going to double that with this, and y'all try to fill that in between, and there's some filler in between so far, but things need to be done. Gobekli Tepe is considered the birthplace of early civilization and attracts millions of local and foreign tourists each year. And is it already getting to that point? For you aren't going to get to see it the way that picture was just shown right there anymore, because that was somebody flying up over it with like a drone or something, and now they've got this dome thing built over it, and they supposedly are stopping all excavation of any of the rest of it. They're going to wait a whole generation of 40 to 60 years before they let somebody else even do another piece of the pie, and I don't know why. Oh, I don't know why. I understand that concept, but I also, whenever you find something this important, how you would just go, okay, well, we've found 4 pits here, so we dug one and it looks incredible. What are you gonna do with the other one? No, we're gonna walk away. You're gonna do what? Well, we're gonna leave it right there and make people scratch their heads for 60 years, a couple of generations. Let all this soak in, and you know what I mean? Let it all soak into the reality of it all before we get further, because preliminary things on the others say that and it's going to change things a little bit too, so small steps, Hallie. The site was discovered in 1963 by researchers from the University of Istanbul in Chicago. The German Archaeological Institute and San Lierfa Museum have been carrying out a joint excavation at the site since 1995, and that's with the person that Schmidt that just passed away a couple of years ago, and they almost like posthumously are like stopping a little bit, and then other people are trying to glean in papers and things out of it, and knowledge. Well, the most significant discovery of the excavations are T-shaped obelisks from the Neolithic era, towering 3 to 6 meters, 10 to 20 feet high, and weighing 40 to 60 tons. And that's the end of this one. But hey, large asteroid passes just by Earth. In fact, they were able to even catch its shockwave. And again, it's one of those ones that we didn't know that was even coming. And so that's neat, but you got to see some of this stuff, right? So let's check this out. Now this is the site that they built inside the museum, and it mocks it, and instead of having it like that one is kind of out there, and by the way, that other one out there is just so everything's covered with dust, a layer of dust, and that's surely not going on here. Although they mock it a little bit around onto it, but you can see how they say this is how it originally was ish in going around. But there's not that big slab that was there, and here's two giant posts, and then the hands coming down, sacred eye. There's all kinds of symbology on this one, and we're right there at the one with the three handbags, right? So this is one, and they've got a little fake photo on the wall that looks kind of like the landscape there, and so it makes you feel like you were there. And they've got it lit up like they did theirs at night, so that's kind of neat. But see if I can get this right for you. And it's going to cut off the left side no matter what. What if I do this? It's gonna ruin it. Close as I can get it. The enigmatic monoliths built some 11,500 years old at Gobekli Tepe, the hell, have been puzzling archaeologists and challenging preconceptions about prehistoric cultures since their discovery in the 90s. Really just blowing things out of the water. And chiefly, how could hunter-gatherers with a supposedly primitive social structure build such monumental stone circles in a barren hilltop in what was now southeastern Turkey? How could a largely nomadic society at the dawn of agriculture marshal the resources and know-how to create what discoveries have been dubbed the oldest known temple in the world found to date? Well, a little answer there might be that I think archaeology was, I think that agriculture was probably going on well before then in ways. For if we believe that it's what takes prognathism out of people, how the snouted jaw look, Cro-Magnon really has little to none. And then after that, people develop somewhat of an overbite. And Cro-Magnon's the first body that shows up with a prominent chin, and there's a lot more to go with that mystery on genetics and people and how that comes about. But he brought the chin in. But when we look at things like this, and we say that there was ancient lost cultures that knew what the hell was going on, if I was to tell you what I'll show you in sacred geometry that they knew back in ancient Egypt before the Greeks had started to figure it out, and what we've done in a modern day with the same concept, it goes back to Sumeria and everything, you'd be like, wow, that's stretching the hell out of it. And I was to show you, oh man, that goes back a couple of thousand years older than that over here and here, it would probably blow your mind. And I planned on doing it, and then looking at Gobekli Tepe like I did before and go, here's some little signs of it too, so things are going on. But these guys have already got this, so I'm already going to jump over and work my way back soon. It's a lot to put together for the sacred geometry ones, and I'm trying to figure out exactly how to break it into pieces so I don't have to rehash it kind of every time over and over again. This implies that, in contrast to the prevailing assumption among Gobekli researchers until now, that there were circles and they were planned as a single unit and possibly built at the same time, those researchers that we talked about before. Thus, thousands of years before the invention of writing or the wheel, the builders of Gobekli Tepe eventually had some understanding of geometric principles and could apply them to their construction plans, concludes the study published in January Cambridge Archaeological Journal. And I've already had some thoughts on this and what that works, as this is pretty much the same picture, but from the other side. And then here's your east-west alignment. There's the broke-off pillars we were talking about before, and there's the one that stood up by the wood that goes on. And you can tell that this is a little lower than this one over here, but it ain't much. But they're saying that the measurement may be off as little as something like 7 or 8 inches, and it's like, well, when you figure out the arch of it in there, they weren't off by much. There's also the figuring for the center on one of those guys where they have it setting now. And even though this was buried like a hill, it's been known that there were earthquakes in this area. And you know that shoves the ground over a foot or two sometimes? Well, sometimes if you have a driveway and you get through doing that, it ain't all lined up anymore. And it's a little kicked and a little busted in here. And this moved a little more than that and kind of settled a little different. And things like that, even though it left it pretty much straight up. That's a reason I believe that whenever they were digging it out, that some of these pillars were ready to fall if they just turned around and dug them out all the way, and they had to prop them up and get them back exactly right because they had been shifted a little bit to where they weren't plumbed anymore. They're not balanced like you can take a yardstick and balance it on your hand. Now if you let it get off a little and stand there, it falls. The initial discovery of the site was a big surprise, and we are now showing that its construction was even more complex than we thought. And this is from the guys that we talked about before. First phase of construction at Gobekli Tepe, or pot-bellied hill in Turkish, has been dated to between 12,000 and 11,000 years ago. This is the earliest part of the Neolithic. In fact, this restates the date of the Neolithic itself, because Neolithic means new stonework, and this is back whenever people aren't just working with stone, but they're all of a sudden doing this type of stuff. As known as PPN, or Pre-Pottery Neolithic A, around the time people in the northern Levant began domesticating plants and animals, launching the agricultural revolution. But it's believed by a lot of people that this may have been a coinciding thing, for people make pilgrimages and so on all the time, and especially if crap happened and stuff, they would probably send somebody up, and you've heard the stories about sending somebody up to talk about the old man on the hill and things like that. Could be that they would come and talk to people like this and try to figure out what's going on. Not that they could figure out the weather, and that's what they really ask for a lot of times, because they'd be going through a drought, but they'd be wondering if this is caused by that eclipse and all those things that you hear about. The site's builders erected several concentric stone circles, setting into the walls massive T-shaped pillars that reached almost 6 meters in height, many of which are decorated with reliefs of animals and other motifs. These circles appear to have been built around pillars, on pairs of pillars, positioned roughly in their center. Working off of that, only 4 circles. This is a look of the Gobekli Tepe mound, and I'm telling you that there are mounds that are near here. And if this is north-south, there's one right here, just right here off the screen, right, literally. And I'll show you a few more that have been found because people started looking, and it's amazing what you can find on Google Maps now. But only 4 circles from PPN, dubbed enclosures A, B, and C, and D, have been excavated so far, but surveys have shown that there are at least 15 more scattered around the hill, as well as half a dozen other similar unexplored sites across southeastern Turkey. Now we're fixing to get into it. There's an unexpected pattern that they found here, and I showed you ones that are inside of each ring and possibly why they ovaled that one versus the round ones and things like that, but this gets into something more, for I'd never be able to have these kind of measurements and stuff. The new study focused on enclosures B, C, and D, which are known to be slightly older than A, and based on the assumption that such a massive construction project would have been beyond the capacities of the small, non-sedentary groups that usually comprise hunter-gatherer societies, most scholars have assumed that all the circles at Gobekli Tepe had to have been built gradually over a long period of time. But it looks like this is a simultaneous thing, and there's more going on, and you're going to have to change your whole little well, maybe they, no, it was bigger than that, dude. Come on now. I know it's ruining, it's already shattered. Okay, so let's look at this in reality. What are the possibilities? Let's quit him and hawing around, living off an old narrative. Narratives are changing. Watch it go. Even people from Israel and Heralds, which part of this comes from, are down with this. So let's get down with this. There are a lot of speculation that the structures were built successively, possibly by different groups of people, and that one was covered up while the next one was being built, but there's no evidence that they are not contemporaneous with each other. Hackley tells Heralds. Hackley, who formerly worked on an archaeological project, applied a method called architectural formal analysis, which is used to trace the planning principles and methods used in the designing of existing structures. So apparently they go around like a surveyor and get some points on things, and it might figure out where walls used to be and stuff like that because of squaring off things. But there was something that was strangely found right here, for there shows that triangle and the perfection of it and what it is, and that's the center of the double, and back to there and back to there. It's kind of strange how it's showing that they had that same concept, and this triangle is figured in part by a whole nother set of sacred geometry, with the line running through it and all these things that can be done with the circles around each other, and you can see the one and the one and they meet, and there's this little line that goes in between, and that goes right between those two lines, and it's not off by much. It looks like it's off by some 7 inches. Well, what if this kind of went and shifted a little bit? Anyhow, using an algorithm, he identified the center points of 3 irregular stone circles. Not surprisingly, those points fell roughly midway between the pair of central pairs in each enclosure, which is just saying that they made this at a perfect triangle or pyramid shape. But what was surprising, however, was that those 3 points could be linked to form a nearly perfect equilateral triangle. Specifically, the vertices were about 25 centimeters away from forming a perfect triangle with sides measuring 19.25 meters each. So it ended up being off by some 8 inches, they said. That is literally like half the thickness of one of those pillars that we're looking at, if you will. It's really not much. Here's a anthropogenic statue found at Gobekli Tepe, but you can see the hands around the belly situation. And that's what it looks like again whenever they show them around these flattened pillars. And it conspicuously looks a lot like Easter Island and other places are found. And you know, a lot of people didn't know Easter Island statues have a whole picture on their back a lot of times and going down. And they had some ships thrown on their back that don't look like ships they could have even possibly made. And if they did, they would have been the hell out of there. But that's another video. I certainly do not expect this, Hackley recalls. The enclosures have different sizes and shapes, so the odds that these center points would form an equilateral triangle by chance are very, very low. The finding confirms previous research and at other sites showing that architects in the Neolithic or even the late Paleolithic didn't build shelters and homes haphazardly, but had the ability to apply rudimentary geometric principles and create standard units of measurement. And this is the MEs that they talk about of the Sumerians, and they're on these tablets, and they have to have these. They have these formulas here, and that's how they lay out cities. And after the Great Flood, they needed it again, and how are they going to lay out this stuff? And somebody stole our MEs, and the whole story that goes along with that idea. But that's another video. At Gobekli Tepe, the discovery of the pattern is evidence of a complex abstract design that could not be realized within the first creating of a scaled floor plan, Hackley says. At time when the invention of writing was millennia away, this could be accomplished, for example, by using reeds of equal length to create a rudimentary blueprint on the ground, he suggests. And I'm saying, you know, he's trying to figure out the most primitive way he can pull it off, and there's more to it maybe than that. Maybe there's somebody stepped off a thing and marked out a spot, and then they go, this is one, and this is this length of string, and you're going to stand over there, and I'm going to line you up with something from where I am, and there you are, and you're going to take that spot. Now you're going to hold on to this much string, and I'm going to spin in a circle, and now we're going to go back to my first stick, and I'm going to hold it, and you're going to spin in a circle, and now we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and everything, and you think, what the hell's going on? Have you ever seen anybody lay out a house? high-frame houses for a while. When they first lay that thing out, they have to figure out, okay, this is the street, this is that, and make it square. You want it all wonky off in there, it's got to be laid out right. And the walls have to be all set right, so the amount of walls and the way the architect had meant to build it is going to sit right on that slab just right. And below the slab, they have to build pillars of the foundation in places, especially here in Texas and stuff. Each enclosure, man, I hope this doesn't go to 2. Each enclosure subsequently went through a long construction history with multiple modifications, but at least in the initial phase, they started as a single project. The implication is that a single project of Gobekli Tepe was 3 times larger than previously thought, or 3 rings built into one, but there's nothing saying that the reason they're 7 inches off is that they built the first one, and when they built the second 2, they triangulated off of that and a projected point that they were pretty damn close at in the first place. There is that too, but I go with their idea because of dating. But it would require 3 times as much manpower. Here's another face that's been shown there, and that's more like a jaguar face or something in there. It almost looks like an alligator as long as it is. The construction would have required hundreds or maybe thousands of workers and could be taken to mark the birth of more stratified society with a level of sophistication previously seen only in later sedentary groups of farmers, says Gopher, an archaeology professor at Tel Aviv University and Hackley's PhD advisor. This is where it starts. The sharing instinct of hunter-gatherer societies is reduced and inequality is growing. Someone is running the show. I don't know if it's shamans or political leaders, but this is a society that, as an architect and somebody who initiates a project like this, has the power to make it happen. And it doesn't look like it's military leaders, for this is the golden age, and people aren't really fighting each other. Sure, there were conflicts, but this wasn't like what we're talking about in, Trojan Wars and incredible things and some of the stuff in the Bible, they all talk about. There's none of that going on. And it's believed that shaman priests would have been running the thing at one time. Political leaders haven't really come into power in any way, shape, or form yet, but it's building out of this. And then what you have is the warlike men end up taking over, being able to lead because they're a great leader anyhow. It rolls through these little phases, but you can see it from back of like times of Sargon, and these conquerors and these things have to have a different way. They're not going around all peaceful telling people the stars do that. No, they're kicking their ass, but ironically then showing them all their knowledge, and because things get passed around quite a bit. Depends on who it is. The new study is amazing contribution to understanding of this enigmatic site, says Anya Belfer-Cohen, an archaeology professor at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and an expert on late prehistory. However, given that there are many stone circles at Gobekli Tepe and other sites nearby, like the ones I'm talking about, that have yet to be excavated, we don't know if the same conclusions can be applied to all these enclosures, cautions Belfer-Cohen, who did not take part in the study. So, well, that's a voice of reason. It's possible that this has gone on in one place, but not used in any of the others, and that is the birth of Pythagorean theorem concept and going with it. Well, they might try to find that and use that as an idea in my mind, but no. I've got different ideals, and guys, this is going to go to part 2 because there's a few minutes left here, and then I've got to try to finish off and talk about some things that I'm going to allude to about coming up stuff. So it's going to be in your top left-hand corner, coming shortly. And look at this guy willing to dip down with a bucket and get magma out of a volcano, wearing basically a spacesuit covered with tinfoil mylar so he doesn't get scorched. And he's still getting scorched, but just not, that's way past stuntman. Anyhow, guys, let's see, how much more do we have of this? Oh, yeah, I remember now. So, yeah, it's going to be about another 10 minutes, maybe a 15-minute in your top left-hand corner, and that's part 2. We will see you there. Peace.